right now I am joined by Avery Gear, who is formerly of NYDIG. If you're not familiar, NYDIG is a Bitcoin crypto company that helps smaller financial institutions offer Bitcoin to their customers. So basically like a savings, checking, and Bitcoin account holding. She's now joined True Digital, which I'm going to let her explain a little bit more here, but she's been a friend of mine for a few years now, and I'm very excited that she's able to join us from New York. So, hey, Avery, how you doing?
Doing good, Brandon. Nice to see you all.
Give me more background on yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career at Credit Suisse, a larger institution, more on the traditional financial side of things. So I actually started as a sales trader doing futures and options, derivatives. And then after that, loved my experience there, was working with hedge funds, asset managers, institutional investors, and decided to go a bit smaller. Credit Suisse was a really large institution, and I wanted to have a little bit more of an impact in the everyday community, and found myself at NYDIG, which was really delivering Bitcoin solutions, like Brandon said, to community banks and credit unions, and so a little more felt connected to the end consumer. And after NYDIG, I went on to join True Digital early on. And so employee essentially number 3 back in January when we started the company. And since then, I've helped lead partnerships and sales. So working again with community banks and credit unions, what we're doing is really building a network business. So working with those FIs to help foster kind of collaboration across the banking industry. It's been really fun, and it's been a great experience to see kind of how go-to-market strategy changes from different institutions. I would say even at Credit Suisse, although all our kind of clients were built into the models, it required a different go-to-market strategy than NYDIG did, which was full of channel partners. And then now at True Digital, it's really been ripe fields of kind of the endless possibilities of how do you bring the company to life? How do you find your first clients? How do you find those loyal consumers? And then really get differentiated in the space.
And I figured this particular topic, when you work in such a difficult industry with customers that can have longer launch times or implementation times, or it's hard to even get into the room with them, the go-to-market aspect of this is super important and can relate to really any industry. So before we dive into the go-to-market side, I want to first kind of set like a foundation level here. Can you just talk to us a little bit more about helping founders find their product market fit to start?
Definitely. I think that's kind of key of as you're drawing out your business plans, and we went through this early on, is how do you really understand the different segmentation across the markets, as well as kind of product intelligence. And a lot of times, as you in the room may all know, when you're kind of first starting out, you might not have that true product intelligence or what are you building. Sometimes when you just start, you're building something because you see a gap in the industry and you don't know exactly what's going to get there. And so thinking about those factors, knowing the uncertainty is okay, because I think what really is important, especially early on for early stage companies, it's how can you be flexible and adaptable. And so really understanding what are the different market segments, how can I have at least a limited amount of product intelligence, knowing that it could change, and then really laying out the competitive kind of landscape across the industry. Mm-hmm. I think why we've had success at this company really early on is we weren't trying to kind of recreate something that already existed. We really wanted to identify the gaps, and you can only do so if you truly understand the competitive landscape. And so those are kind of the key themes, but I'd say adaptability is the most important of in those early stages. How are you able to pivot depending on the market kind of landscape, depending on different competitors who might pivot their strategy once they see you come up? And then how do you really just understand your value proposition as you bring your product, as you bring a network to life?
And so once you find that fit, and you're looking at, an expansive market that you could kind of pursue, how are you channeling in on, okay, what is actually obtainable for my company, right? As opposed to, okay, we're going to go after this $8 billion market. Sure, on paper it is, but there's a lot of nuance to that. So maybe I can ask you to put on your skepticism hat for a second and say, okay, when someone comes to you and says, oh, it's $1 trillion market or it's a whatever $1 billion market, What are you thinking at that time?
Great question. And I'd love your perspective too on some of the companies you've worked with. But one of the things that we've done different here that was a comparison to other firms I've been with is really starting direct and starting small. Of how do you find that niche market in a sense of who are those key foundational clients and how do you really foster more than a relationship with them versus just trying to get your first sales in the book. And I would say that has been crucial of how do we really find loyal long-term partners in a small strategies, a small sector, especially in the community banking space. And so what we've done is sure the addressable market of all community financial institutions is maybe around 7,000. But how do we identify those 20 founding members who we can have really a long-term partnership with and that can guide in our strategy? And so I think that's been foundational of instead of going out and getting all of these, the total addressable market, it's how do we find the key partners? Because at the end of the day, having those then almost as a sales arm and having those loyal relationships have really spearheaded the growth for everything else.
Now, when you're finding that niche market, are you relying solely on your internal team to go identify it? Are you leveraging outside partners in any way, consultants? I guess, how should like a founder that's in that seed, Series A, even Series B stage that might need to pivot a bit, what can they leverage?
Another great question. I would say for us, we've done a little bit of all the above. And so having those personal connections, whether we're tapping into industry advisors, I think one thing that we did different here at True Digital is we knew right up front that it wasn't just going to be me and one of the co-founders as a sales team. And how do we tap into the advisors that are excited about our mission and excited about our goals that are really well respected in the certain industry that we're in to help almost kind of preach what we're doing on behalf of us. And so part of it's that. And then the rest is just truly fostering those relationships. One other thing early on, I would say showing up in person has been so important. And so being with them, being at the table live versus Zoom, which has been so accustomed these days. And funny how I'm on Zoom right now, but showing up in person, I think, has really led to those key founding members being instrumental in our growth and success. And it's hard to develop those relationships when you're not in the room with them at the table, hand to hand.
Yeah, and that area of like the advisorship or your board of directors or all these different things, they do kind of play into your go-to-market strategy over time. How early are you looking at your board of advisors or your board of directors as a sales channel in a way?
I would say organically, even before we went to market, because
Okay.
this then that ties back of as you're starting to plan your go-to-market strategy, who are those experts in the industry that can help you advise where to go, where not to go? And so for us, it was really leaning on them before we even started talking about our product and identifying different types of advisors, someone with a sales background, someone with an engineering background, and how do we help them craft our go-to-market strategy almost behind the scenes. So then when we do want to rely on them as maybe a sales arm or a referral arm, it doesn't even feel like that. It feels like they're so ingrained in the start of the company that they can almost explain it or share it better than we can from the outside in.
When you're going to be leveraging other people or other resources or third parties in any way, are you working with them on the kind of critical messaging that you want to get across? Are you just giving them, here's how I want you to say it, especially when you've got to rely on a lot of resellers when you're at an earlier stage because you just don't have the bandwidth to go out and meet every customer face to face? How are you making sure that your messaging is concrete?
It's a great point, and I think this is also foundational to crafting the strategy early on is having that marketing and the communication plan kind of tight knit of how do you all across the organization, whether it's a designer or an engineer on the back end, really know what are we solving in the industry and where does our product fill those gaps, and having the advisors at that table for a lot of those conversations to then be able to share it has been foundational. And I would also say this is interesting, and I think Brandon, you and I talked a little bit about this, is where does marketing fall in your organization? Who's running it? How did you hire them? How kind of keyed into the product and the development are they to be able to align with the pivots in messaging or the appropriate channels of messaging? And I'd love to get your perspective too of the companies you've worked with. How do you see that marketing channel sometimes differ? Does the head of marketing or the communication efforts roll up to the co-founder, or are they in their silo? And how do you deal with those organizational challenges kind of across companies early on when the marketing is so important and the communication for rollouts?
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, right? Especially when you're at an inflection point of growth. As a founder, there's a point where you need to delegate and take yourself out of the equation, right? Because usually everyone who's a founder in this room, you're doing the development, you're doing the marketing, you're doing the sales, you're doing everything in between. And at some point, and it's different for every company, you got to kind of pick a lane, and that you hold on to that lane. And you're okay with giving away a portion or delegating a portion of the business to someone else. And it's in this kind of sales and marketing vein. I mean, I do not have a creative finger in my body, or bone in my body, I should say. So I would argue that you're much better adept at answering the marketing side of this. But I can say from a sales side, I know I'm good at sales. I know I'm not good at marketing. So therefore I got to take myself out of it. But from a go-to-market perspective, you kind of need both of them playing nice in the sandbox, right? Because one hand washes the other. So do you usually see in the startups that you worked with, are you usually seeing founders needing to dive further into the sales and marketing side as it grows? Or do you think founders should take themselves out of the equation, focus more on investor relations, maybe DevOps? What do you think most founders wind up tending towards?
I would say it's been very different across the organizations I've worked with, and it's an important question of at the end of the day, the marketing, even social media presence is what really drives success, especially early on. And so more than not, I've seen whether it's a co-founder or the person who's out on the road with clients having the most interactions with what is that marketing communication strategy. And I think the most important thing is that it's cohesive. If you have so for us, we outsource social and we outsource kind of marketing communications. But myself and the co-founder are in every single conversation, because if your social media strategy doesn't align with your press releases or something else, it's really clunky. And so we've been really lucky of spending the extra time to be able to make sure it's kind of a cohesive wheel, or else that can really make or break it early on. If you don't have that messaging that you're communicating with clients, that's then messaging out on public forums. It's really tough to drive the message and to make it cohesive and concise for your viewers. I think the one thing that we've even had a little bit of struggle about in some recent kind of messaging and marketing materials, even though we spend a lot of time on it, is how do we make it very clear of what we're doing, what is the problem we're solving, how do we make sure that that is correctly going out to the audience? Because someone could read a press release and have two different viewpoints on it. And so how do you make it as clear as possible for any viewer, for any reader, whether they're in your industry and know about community banking or know about credit unions or not? And I think that's really key of being tied in, putting more time. I think you see the rewards from it. The founders and the salespeople who are talking to clients, the more time they spend with marketing and social, the more rewards you will see.
Yeah, and I could say from our side, we see more founders tend towards the marketing and sales side over time than not, because to your point, they are the face, right? They are the ones usually meeting the customers, shaking their hands and whatnot, and that's, especially in the industries that we work in, that is highly important to have some stability in who the face of the company might be. So thank you. That's fascinating. When you're developing your go-to-market strategy, you have all these different voices in the room, which we kind of already talked about. But I guess, what are some of the known variables that really everyone should be on a level playing field when entering that first conversation? What are some of the things that every person of your company that's part of that conversation should just know go into the first strategic meeting, really?
I would say for that, kind of going back to what we talked about, that market
Yeah.
segmentation is huge. If you are selling to more than one buyer or customer persona, how do you direct the conversation in the right way? I think being able to have different talk tracks or different kind of use cases for a various customer persona is really important to identify. Because at all the companies I've worked with and worked for, it's not just one. Oftentimes there's two, three, five customer personas, and how do you make sure that you are coherently
Mhm.
communicating to those buyers? Because if you have one talk track or if you have one use case, I think it can get lost across the industry and across your sales process. And then the second part I would say is, especially for early on companies, is just product readiness of how do you ensure your product is ready for launch and how do you make sure that all the bugs and kinks are worked out, because first impressions are so important, not only with clients and people but with the product that they experience. And so putting the time in early on, having outside viewers, whether it's someone at another company or your advisor knows someone, how do you have someone come in and really understand your product from an outside lens before fully going to market? I think that can get lost a lot early on, and it is one of the things that we made sure we delivered, a better product than maybe the Figma demos or what we were showing early on. And how do we
Yeah.
make sure that that is effective?
Yeah. So then kind of switching gears to the sales side a bit more. Now, when you're first launching the go-to-market, are you relying more on direct sales than you anticipate, just so you can have the strength in messaging? And then at what point do you start leveraging more of those ecosystem players or channel partners? And I'll dive into a couple more questions about that piece. But I guess, is that typically where you see direct sales at first and then maybe transition?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Direct sales, being in the room and finding those founding partners to really then create a flywheel effect and sell your product. One of our KPIs earlier this year, which was really interesting, was not just how many sales do we have, but how many referrals from our current users do we have. And so creating that flywheel effect of making sure that our founding members, our first 100 clients, are blown away by the product experience, by the user experience, by the engagement, to then resell it on our behalf, has been key. Referrals are so important, especially in the banking industry or really any industry. And so having that direct sales, those relationships, and continued engagement from those players has gone a really long way. And then you can go on to, who are the channel partners that I want to form a real relationship with, and not casting too far of a net early on. Because as you stay lean and as you're smaller, we're still just a 15-person company. And so how do you manage those channel partners so you really are getting the most benefit from them directly versus going to all the channel partners and trying to do things in a more discombobulated manner? And so I think that's crucial, the direct sales one, but then those channel partners, when you are ready for that and as they come along organically, how do you put enough time and effort into those and not try to boil the ocean too early?
Yeah. So then how are you incentivizing those, early adopters for referrals, or, as an extension, when you move to the channel partners, how are you incentivizing them? Is it always just, dollars and cents?
No, so this has been a really interesting one. It's been dollars and cents at previous roles, but really what we've created here at True Digital is unique in that it is a network, and the network becomes better for all of those nodes on it as each additional one increases. And so trying to really create that trust in the network itself and not have dollar signs kind of tied to the referrals, really making them want to do it out of their own success and their own benefit, has actually proven greater than trying to tie dollar amounts to it. What we've also done is we've kept our pricing really low to start for this first year. And so, just to kind of give an example of our pricing tiers, it starts as low as $2,500 and goes up to $10,000. And so, a 10% referral fee on one of those yearly subscriptions is only so much. And so, trying to take the dollars actually away from it and incentivize in other manners has proven really, really attractive to date, especially given the clients that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, there's actually a nice comment online. I don't know if you can see it there, Avery, on your screen, but from Linda Calabria. It's in the session tab. So she writes, has anyone run into a situation where there are no internal resources, so you can't really do the direct sales model approach? Best outside source is going to be contractors or channel partners who help get the product to the next stage. But then leadership, which sits maybe in a different market, states that too many contractors are being used rather than outside resources. So what's the best way to show that these outside contractors or channel partners are worth it, right? And showing to your leadership and your board that it's not just, throwing money away or a lack of effort on the internal team.
It's a great question from Linda. And I think this is something early on that's almost you have to test with. And so one thing that I've learned is the most you can get out of those long yearly contracts and test different partners and see the true results in the numbers really goes a long way. And so for this and really any partner you work with, whether it's leveraging an outside contractor for social media or for communications with the press or for these channel partners, how do you make sure that you're setting up relationships that you have time to put in? Because you get out what you put in. I think with all of these, whether it's on the sales side or another type of contracting side. And so how do you make sure that your team is set up to put in the information that these people need to successfully provide you with what you need to be successful in the market? And then how do you make sure that you are able to test different relationships? Because at the end of the day, it depends how your team works with them, and it depends what you need at different points in time. As you pivot throughout the first 6 months or the first kind of 2 years, how do you make sure you're set up to take advantage of what you need at any given point in time and be able to provide kind of the messaging accordingly to any of your outside partners, and then in turn internally to board members or co-founders or whatnot.
Yeah. And feel free, if anyone has a question, I'm happy to bring a mic over to you. So if anyone, let me know. Other than that, you mentioned the word pivot. So not every go-to-market strategy is going to work, first right out of the gate. So how quickly should founders think about changing their strategy? Should it be right away? What is the amount of time necessary to test if a strategy is actually working?
Great question. I would say for the early stage, giving it enough time to test, and not just test, but get user feedback. And so this goes back to how do you create those loyal customers early on, even if it's one or two. So then as you test and iterate, they're continually a sounding board of someone who's actually using your product or guiding at least the product roadmap. And so that's what's most important of how do you get that market feedback, whether it's from a client, an advisor, someone you're exploring being an advisory relationship with, and that will really determine how long you give something a go. But I think the ability to pivot slight things versus huge material things within your strategy or your go-to-market strategy is really important. And so don't pivot too quick, but also be able to pivot the small things to test and iterate on those to see how it happens versus fully pivoting the strategy. I would also say organizationally, as even with a small team, being able to kind of reshuffle that and work with the right employees in the right manner. And maybe it's a different kind of reporting line, or maybe it's a slightly different job description or role when you first bring on someone is also crucial, because they're able to help see things from a different lens, being in different spots across the organization, having different ties to different kind of product roadmap ideas or with different engineers or designers. And how do you make the organization work cohesively, understand what's going on to then better direct those small tweaks or those small pivots, and do so proactively because they really understand the way you're working, the way your company's working, and facilitating a culture of that, I think, goes a really long way.
I keep realizing I'm looking at you down here, and I should be looking at you through the camera, so I'm sorry. So you look at me eye to eye.
It's shuffling all around for me, so it's good.
I do want to ask, okay, so if I'm early stage founder, let's say, pre-seed, seed stage, what is the bare minimum? I have a product market fit. I have a minimum viable product out there ready to launch. I'm ready to beta test it, pilot. What is the minimum go-to-market strategy, or what are the pieces of that that I should absolutely have as my starting point?
I would say for the starting point, again, it goes back to that marketing communication plan, getting all the employees in sync. And then how do you do so? Is it through social? Is it through press releases? Is it through collaborations with partners to kind of ride on the back of someone who's maybe more defined player in the market? And then B, the distribution channels. So knowing the direct sales or the partnership, and then very clearly being able to show the value proposition in kind of lockstep with those customer personas. And so those are kind of the key things that I like to think about. And being able to know that those customer personas, if one of those changes or if you need to add another one, then how do you also weave that into all the other components from that value proposition, from those use cases, and then ultimately from the marketing and communication plan that you'll develop.
So then I take it to the next stage. I'm at like a Series A. I get some institutional capital. I'm kind of scaling. What changes, right? What am I adding? What am I taking out?
I would say there what you're adding is people to really be aligned with the mission of the company to help expand that. And so if you've started in a niche market, you know you want to expand or you know you need to speed up sales by X amount, how do you hire those strategic players and not too many of them to really be on your same kind of drive for success? And I'd say what we've done with a very lean team is be able to do more with less employees. And so, how do you make those strategic hires? They may be more expensive than you want to pay, but you know you don't need two, you just need one. And so then it's communicating that internal strategy to one less person to then have more effect in the market. And that's kind of where I would scale next, and actually what we're looking for of how do you do this in an effective manner, but really be lockstep with all the employees around you and create that culture of innovation and of winning early on.
I do have a question in the crowd. I don't know if I have a mic to hand off. Do we have another handheld mic anywhere? No? That's okay. I can repeat.
Thank you for being here. My name is Daniel. My question is, you talked about like for those in the early stages of trying to like do launch through press releases, social media. But if you're so early that you actually want to maybe test with a group of people before making it public, what would you advise? Will you say still go for that strategy of like doing social media press releases, or do you like launch to a small group of people, try to test, get feedback, iterate, or like what would your advice be in that situation?
Could you catch all that, Avery?
I caught something about social and press release. And
Yeah,
that
here.
was,
What? You want to actually? Only because we don't have the handheld. Oh, excellent. We do have a handheld. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Daniel. I'm the founder of a company that helps immigrants through the immigration process and settling in new countries. So my question is, when you're very early, you talked about launching through press releases and social media, but where you're trying to test, do you advise you first test with a smaller group of maybe like a group of 20 or 40 or like a small cohort, to get feedback first, then make certain changes before then going public? What would your advice be in that situation? Thank you.
great question, and sounds like an awesome company. So congrats. And I agree. Testing smaller, I think, goes actually a long way. And so whether that's through social posts, PR, engagements, how do you time that strategically and make sure you are getting that valuable feedback you need early on? And so whether that's through advisors or kind of user groups, getting that feedback before you kind of roll out publicly all that you're doing is key to then having success. And I'd say the other piece there is really that of creating a social and marketing drum roll. And so it's not just about that one press release that you put out announcing X, Y, and Z. It's about how did those 5 press releases before or those 5 social posts build up to the grander plan. And so that's been a really key thing because it'll attract more readers, attract more users. And so being strategic about kind of the chess pieces you play from a marketing communication strategy before unveiling the grander plans, I think has more buildup, more excitement, and then will ultimately go further in getting kind of the bang for your buck of what you're doing. And so we've done this actually firsthand at our company to really lead up with whether that's other players in the space, strategic alliances, and then unveil kind of the full thing of what we're doing after we have that momentum in the market, after we have more LinkedIn followers. And so getting the market feedback early on, but then being really strategic about how you play that social marketing game plan is really important for when you have those key pieces that you want to get to the market, those key messaging things. How do you have their attention?
Is that it? Perfect. Awesome. Well, we have some questions coming in online. I do want to follow up on that question, though, before I bring up those ones. So how are you going about picking the right PR firm to work with, right? You're a little bit later stage, most likely, or maybe you can afford it at an earlier stage. It's almost as if you're picking a new type of relationship that truly understands you. So I guess how should someone think about that when choosing their first PR firm?
Great question. And this is a tough one because it is a really important aspect of what you're doing. But I'd also say it's picking the right firm and knowing that no matter what, you need to put in X hours a week to make sure that they are truly lockstep with your company and your marketing and your messaging and your buyer before you just kind of set them loose. And so irregardless of the budget, I would say the more you put in and the more you understand that you will put in when picking a right partner, to not kind of have false expectations of, oh, if I pay this $5,000 a month for this firm, then I'm going to get X, Y, and Z. But knowing that if I pick this firm, that's going to be 2 to 3 hours a week of calls on my side to ensure that they get up to speed, as well as being tight knit on every single word that goes in that early publication. Because those small words, those small nuances can change how a reader anticipates your product or comes to understand it. And so picking the right one, I would say, is really from a culture perspective. How do you spend time with, whether it's the founders of the marketing firm? How do you spend time and see what they will kind of commit per week? I would say we spend on average 2-3 hours a week with our kind of outsourced marketing PR firms, which might be a little more than average. And that doesn't count emails or back and forth on the drafts, but being close knit there, I think, is really important early on.
Yeah, and we have a comment from Karen online that says, make sure that the contacts that they have are ones you really want to target, right? It's not just 100%. A random PR firm. Take a long time to build that relationship with the press or any influencers for that matter.
That's a great suggestion. And we've seen that firsthand of really kind of targeting the PR firm in the space that is known for working with community banks and credit unions, because it's not just educating an outside firm about your product, it's then educating them about the market. And so making sure that you're picking contacts or a firm that has experience in your niche market will go a lot further in the communicating and the back and forth, and then the relationships they have to pitch stories and really influence where you're seeing traction.
We have another question online from Stephen Guerrero. For the pre-seed angel phase, how do you balance the first go-to-market efforts to attract customers while simultaneously showing scalable growth to attract capital? Are there special considerations to take into account while doing these two parallel tracks?
Great question. And Brandon, I'd love your insights on this afterwards, since you work with a lot of companies on this. But I would say focusing more on the groundwork that you're laying and not focusing as much on the numbers, even though it's tough in a fundraising environment, especially in today, it will set you up for more longer term success. And so finding, again, those loyal groups, even if it's 5 loyal kind of customers or people versus the 20 that you had targeted, will again kind of create a flywheel effect and a referral channel for the longer term success of your business, as well as playing around with your pricing strategy. I think that goes into it a little bit. If you have any wiggle room to kind of get on that lower scale early on to get those loyal customers, get them in the door, and then provide that feedback so you can enhance the product, goes a long way. And then even though it helps your numbers, but might be lower on the revenue side or the profit side, it's an important
and then from the investor side, I mean, it's more, we work, Avery and I both work in a very sleepy industry. It's an industry that's ripe to be broken, but takes a long time to break at the same time. And so having that one champion, whether it's a customer or an investor or an advisor, that can really kind of beat the drum for you is fantastic. And having that use case study is even better. I would say the big one, especially if you're going to sell into sleepier industry, so we're talking healthcare, prop tech, fintech, whatever it might be, it's knowing that your go-to-market is basically hand-holding a lot of times, especially with that third-party customer. It's walking them through not only the value of what you're doing and how it can help impact the industry, but rather it's walking them down the road of how each step along the way, what they need to do. Especially with a bank or not to make fun of law firms because we're in Suffolk law, but law firms, accounting firms, whatever it might be, it's okay. Here's what we need from you before we can go on to phase 2. It's grueling sometimes, but having that all buttoned up and like having a real activation plan as part of the go-to-market strategy helps your customer ease into the water so much faster. I do have a question down the room here.
So my name is Susan Munter. I own an advertising agency and we specialize in startups. We've launched 8 startup brands in the last 5 years. But that's not why I'm standing up. I'm standing up because we're creatives. We love to create. We love to solve really complicated problems. That's agencies worldwide, which I've worked for a number of them. I'm telling you this because we want to be part of the journey. We want to be part of the success. We want to be part of these challenges. And you're going to get so much more out of your agency the more you involve them, not just for their profession, but for their humanity, for them as humans. We always go above and beyond because we just believe so much in what you're trying to do and what we're trying to do. And where I've seen relationships break down is where it's, well, you said you were going to spend 10 hours on this, and this only looks like 8, like the nickel and diming and the little, if you don't like something, it's our job to make it right. But the more you can act as partners, you're going to get so much more out of whatever creative agency you work with.
So do you work on a certain stage of company or across the board?
Across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been pre-funded.
Oh, go ahead, Avery.
I was just going to say that's incredibly true. And the more you put in and the more you actually bring them on from an earlier stage. So you might feel you don't have the budget or you can't do this yet until you have X, Y, and Z. The earlier they come into the story and they can actually see those changes or the messaging changes, I think goes a really long way. And just bringing them in, again, the more time you put in, the more you will get out. And so the more you view it as a partnership and a relationship and almost a channel partner, is going to be really important to the early on success and then just the fruitful relationship. And we've had a great experience with ours as well and getting the time that they need to understand the product and be with you for the journey because they put so much in and are really, your success is their success. And vice versa.
Hey, Avery, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Shazab Lada, I oversee Forte Partners in Talent Solutions. Question around co-development with a partner early on and the risk of that being branded too customized to a particular client versus being a little more generic and, larger client base, right? Any points of views on that?
Repeat the last part of that question again. It kind of cut out.
Being locked to one client in a co-development stage versus relevancy across the industry and, the risks of that in terms of that association.
Great question. And we experienced this a little bit in my previous role. I think it really depends on the client itself, the culture that the client brings to the table, what they want out of the relationship. But I think you can get in trouble where your team is maybe focused on just one versus scaling the product and scaling the tech of one to many. And so it's a give and take, and it's a really hard kind of something to view outside or view in a silo. I think you have to view it in kind of the broader picture of your company. And depending on the partner or the client and what the longer term potential looks like for them, and if there's any way to replicate the work or the tech or even the legal docs, all of these considerations that go into the unique one-offs that you do early on, will affect kind of what happens down the road and the ability to scale or pull team members off certain other important and high pressure tasks to focus on that one-to-one. So it's a great question, and it's really hard to decide on those types of things. But depending on the partner, depending how willing they are to be to lead you throughout the rest of the industry and really have a seat at a table with you, can go a long way. And so depends on the case, but those are things you can't necessarily look at a silo and kind of put rough dollar amounts or rough time amounts of what is this taking my team member off instead of something else? Are there legal considerations? And then how do you have those conversations with that specific partner to make sure that there's more on the table than just a financial perspective from them? How do they help really shape your company and your roadmap and be foundational if you put that time in early on from other strategic initiatives?
Avery, do you see a lot of companies taking that first beta or pilot customer as really helping them build this out and putting them on their board for the future?
Really good question. And we've seen this and we've thought about this. And what we've actually done recently, and an interesting thing to think about is there can be very different levels of boards. And so how do you think about maybe an advisory board where you have your first 5 founding banks or your first 5 founding customers really driving your strategy, but beyond that, it's not much more versus a board of directors and your advisory board. There's kind of different layers to that. And I think about getting creative with the ways you can bring in different partners in a very meaningful way without necessarily dollar amounts tied to that or kind of legal considerations with how a board looks and acts and has kind of standards around. So think about how you can kind of think about a board in a different lens. You can have partners that might be something that doesn't even have to be called a board, but how do you bring those in early on, but in a strategic manner? I think you want a good dispersion of what those members represent. So it's not just 5 different clients on your advisory board who all look the same. How do you get someone with an X perspective and another one has a Z perspective? I think you want different sizes, different shapes, different colors of what that makeup looks like.
So then how do you, I guess, when do you make that decision to switch your board up a bit, right? Is it at different financing stages? Is it at different stages of the growth of number of people in the company? Shanti here actually asked, how do you also compensate the boards to sustain that interest and mutual benefit?
It's a great question of how do you compensate them? How do you make sure that they're not only along for the ride because of their own good being or their own interest? And I would say there's a few different ways you can do this, whether it's kind of consulting arrangements month to month, or as well as thinking about how does a certain group have influence in a lighter manner over your product development. And so maybe that's a monthly meeting with your advisory board or with a group, and they get to voice their opinions on your product roadmap and maybe have votes on it or really help drive the mission of the company. And so different ways to do it, whether it is through compensation, monthly consulting arrangements, or that true product enhancement and being involved from the decision-making process, I think goes a long way. And as they kind of draft of, I would like to see X, Y, and Z, and 3 of the 5 agree, maybe you do move forward, but it should be a collaborative way to provide feedback and gain insights from hopefully your users or at least experts in the space.
So we're coming up on our last 15 minutes here. I'm going to switch over to metrics and monitoring your go-to-market campaigns and how you should do it, but I want to see if anyone had any questions on anything discussed so far. Okay.
Really great questions in the room.
Yeah. So Avery, I guess you already talked a little bit about how long you might want to wait to see if a campaign is working or a breakdown's working. But I guess what are you looking at to see if something is successful or not? What are you tracking?
For us specifically, I would say one of those being referrals. And of course, what we're tracking is new users per month or kind of new contracts signed per month. But I think that only goes so far in kind of the long-term success. And so how do you think about other metrics that really create this flywheel effect of selling your business? One of those being referrals. Are you seeing referrals? Are you not? And if not, why? And then the other part of that is really kind of how do you create engagement? So whether that's clicks on your products or logins, and that really goes hand in hand with thinking about scaling either your customer support team or a client success manager, because after this kind of first sales cycle, we have kind of 1-year terms to start. How do you make sure that you are getting renewals? And that'll be an increasingly important topic at any company, and really having metrics on that user engagement, clicks on your weekly newsletter or logins to the product are kind of the key things that I look at beyond just the how many banks or credit unions did we sign in this particular month.
So then on top of that, is there typically a timeline you're looking at where things get stale, right? Or things get stagnant? And is it related to, okay, we know our social media campaign is only good for maybe this month, right? Or maybe we know that this channel partner is only engaged with us during the spring. Like, how do you think about laying all those out in the various go-to-market strategies you might have going on at one time?
We had a perfect example of this the other month. We had our same newsletter. It went out once a week. We knew it was frequent, but we wanted to stay kind of top of mind. And that open rate went down below 5%. And so we tested 5 different, after that, different kind of titles, subject lines, different structure, still had no impact on that open rate. And so now what we've decided to do is, hey, let's scratch that weekly. It was too much. And then how do we create a new email campaign? And so I'd say, how do you make sure you're tracking that from either an open rate or a click-through rate? And then when you see a constant kind of decline, how do you completely change that up? But we gave it a few different iterations of that same weekly newsletter to make sure that we weren't changing anything too fast. And excited to see kind of the outputs of what we're doing next in terms of how does that newsletter look? How do we change it up?
So then on the flip side of that, then if something's getting stagnant, if something's doing really, really well, how do you pour fuel on the fire, right? How can you enhance it further? I don't know if it's just putting more money and scaling it out. What are your thoughts on that?
So this goes back to kind of how do you create a communication messaging strategy that creates that constant drum roll and those chess pieces. And so for us, when we have a great press release with lots of responses, whether it's on LinkedIn, social, email, inbounds, how do we follow it up with something stronger? And so putting fuel on the fire, like you said, is crucial, of creating that steady drum roll of whatever your marketing or social campaign is. And so whenever we develop those, we make sure we have 5 or 3 in the hopper, and then strategically decide which one goes next. Do we need a little more of this or a little more of that? And make sure that we have that constant backlog of whatever it is, whether it's press releases or partnerships, and then strategically place them based on what happens off of the first or second ones.
So then how many plans or initiatives are you having live at one time? I guess not live, I shouldn't say that. I guess how many go-to-market plans are you creating before choosing one? So
right now, for example, we have 8 different ones in the hopper, which is, I would say, above average. I think 5 is a solid number, but I think making sure they're all intertwined. And so then this also goes into how are you showing up to the marketplace? What industry events are you attending? Are you sponsoring a trade show? Are you having a booth somewhere? And how do you strategically lay out all of that? And so these factors feed off one another. The social feeds off the industry events, which feeds off the press releases. And how do I strategically time different press releases to hit when I'm maybe at an industry event or I'm co-hosting a dinner or a happy hour with a channel partner? And so all of that behind the scenes of how do you map it out? And it's really that of, again, I think a salesperson working hand in hand with marketing, or it being one and the same, to really understand where am I going to be? Who is my buyer there? Is it my customer persona of Sue, or is it my customer persona of Bob? And then how do I differ and pull on different levers of what I have in my backlog of what I can test?
So then if you have, say, 5 to 8 campaigns ready to go and you're picking and choosing, there's a real potential that you burn out your customer, right? They just get fatigued from seeing your name constantly and your messaging constantly. They might actually be turned off. So when do you start seeing that maybe in the metrics or in your monitoring to say, okay, we got to dial it back a bit?
Definitely in the unsubscribe rate. And so what was interesting in my particular example where our open rate went a little bit down, our unsubscribe rate was still kind of nothing. We maybe had one a month. And so it was interesting to see those changing metrics, but I think the unsubscribe rate is key to watch, and then the changes on LinkedIn. And so are you gaining, and at what rate per week, and do you have an off week? And making sure you kind of understand where you can put dollars on social as well. I think those actually go a really long way. And to pull on those different levers and to make sure you're monitoring that unsubscribe or unfollow rate to make sure none of your initiatives are causing that is kind of the key metric we like to watch.
Got it. Well, anyone have any questions in the room at all or online? Feel free to add them into the chat. Otherwise, I was going to ask Avery, what is kind of the one or two things? I know we talked about a lot. We talked about everything from the product market fit aspect to this all the way to the monitoring of the campaigns. What, as a starting point, is the number one thing you think everyone in the room should leave the room with?
I would say loyalty. How do you really create a product and a strategy and a experience for your user, no matter what the product is, no matter what you're selling, to drive loyalty early on? Because I think loyalty is something that is really hard to get at later stages. And so how do you put in extra work for those early adopters, those early customers, to make sure that they not only are loyal to your brand and to your mission and to your company, but then help you help them ultimately? And I would say that's kind of the key one. And then the second would just be to be prepared to have changes and not be scared of changes, whether it's from an employee perspective or from whoever you're working with on an outsource front, or certain aspects about the product early on. Be really open to that feedback and try to harness that feedback to then be able to have that influence your next 6 months. And not being scared of that flexibility, that adaptability. It's so key in the first year or two of any company, and to embrace that, and to embrace a culture of that, and to find employees who embrace a culture of that, versus that causing concern or agita within the business.
That was perfect. We did have one question kind of roll in there. I don't know if you see it, but what are the latest and good ways to measure MROI? I think that's meant to mean marketing ROI, but I don't want to. So Shanti, if you want to clarify, and while you maybe get started on that, we do have another one come in that from, I want to say, Odalise Guzman. Sorry, Shanti came back. Marketing ROI. You want to answer that one first before I jump to Odalise?
Yes, and I see both of them. I think both are actually tied together, of creating a go-to-market strategy early on. At least a lightweight version of it is crucial, because if you don't create that lightweight version of the go-to-market strategy, then how do you know what kind of marketing ROI do you want to target? And so they play into each other. I would say, do you have to do a foundational brand messaging exercise or pay for an outsourced go-to-market strategy? No. You know the customer the best, you know the company the best, and kind of what benefits for your rewards you will get. But building those building blocks, finding the customer personas, so everyone at the company, because business development is closest to it, sales is closest to it, so they don't have to spend time necessarily writing it out. But for your designers and for your engineers or for the back office people to understand that go-to-market strategy is almost more important than the salesperson. And so how do you make sure that the company is all on the same ship, versus someone getting left on shore because sales or co-founders didn't take the time to kind of catch them up early on and make sure they were on kind of the right cruise ship? And then I want to make sure I hit on that latest and good ways to measure marketing ROI. Again, I would say keep track of the unsubscribe rate. And then what are you seeing, and how do you strategic lay it out across the industry and across the calendar of what industry events are you going to, making sure you have a solid one a quarter, and then using those metrics after the events of what did I spend on this, not only on the sponsorship, but the travel and the food and all of the extra costs, so that your team can really understand what does this event cost, and then what are my benefits of that. Did I have a customer convert? Did I have 5 new leads come to my funnel? And I think that's crucial. The funnel generation too early on is one thing we didn't talk near enough about today. But not only do you want those metrics of new users or new signups, but you want to create a really backlog of your funnel that feels impossible to get through. How do you make sure you're having generation for leads, and then just measuring your marketing ROI based on kind of clicks, open rate, amount of times you're seen in the media per month, whether that's a social post that gets X amount of likes, or you have a press release with a partner, or you have a press release of your advisory board, and make sure you're monitoring that and making sure it's not too much, but you're creating a steady drum roll of what you're doing and what you're about to unfold to the industry.
That's great. Any last questions? We have a couple more minutes. Otherwise, happy to let Avery go live her life and enjoy your day.
We are
All set?
at an industry event in New York City as I speak called Finovate Fall. If anyone virtually is here, find me on LinkedIn and we can get together.
Yep.